Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about, I think, something that's extremely important. This will not be a flippant episode, hopefully not a tremendously long episode. And it's about PTSD and the fact that I think that PTSD, this isn't revolutionary, and let me preface it by this. When you go to your doctor, your psychiatrist, your psychologist, if you have a means of dealing with this and it works for you, then this little video amateur interpretation of the situation may have little value. Why make this episode? Do I suffer from PTSD? If I do, it's at such a microscopic level I don't realize it. I'm going to suggest I do not suffer from it at all. Don't know that I ever have. I don't know. I'm hoping that the soldiers who come back with this, and it's not just soldiers, that's one of the points I want to make about making this video, but obviously they are some extremely important individuals. I put my startup in this building. I guess it's technically Marina Del Rey. Got to be careful how I frame this because I don't know if I'm supposed to say where this place was or what's going on, but they were pioneering new PTSD treatments using virtual reality. And so I sat down with the gentleman who runs the place, who's a former soldier. Absolute badass, let me tell you. Holy shit. And he explained it to me for the very first time in a way that I understood it. Back in the day, you used to call it shell shock. And I think the value of this episode is simply this. If you haven't been to any treatment of any kind and you just don't like doctors and you don't like the way they talk to you and they start talking about the limbic system in your brain, all that, it's all true, maybe, probably. But let's just say you need a little primer to get you to kind of understand things, and maybe this will just be like something that helps you understand something completely outside of any war theater. Maybe you've had some abusive situations, you've been involved with some chaotic moments in life. We could call them accidents. Maybe you're at a traffic accident, or you just witnessed something that blew your mind and you've always felt a little uneasy after that. The way this gentleman explained it to me, I'm going to paraphrase it in my terms because I think it instantly clicks a little bit better. Imagine you have an event that gets lost inside your mind. A traumatic event that gets lost inside your mind. This thing happened and you can't remember it, but you are disturbed by it and affected by it often, if not every single day and every minute of every day. It pops up at different times. I'm going to describe this whole thing from a much more primal standpoint than I've ever heard any of the psychiatrists explain it to me, because I think that has value and it sort of has the chance of putting us all on the same playing field. That, you know, PTSD and shell shock is not something that people who are weak experience and people who are strong don't experience. Everybody can experience this. The only difference is that the event, the traumatic event, hasn't occurred to the other people that don't have it. Whether it be an IED going off underneath the vehicle, you're in the middle of a whole ordinance coming in on you and that wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe you just got attacked by the enemy. You lose someone very close to you, or not even close to you, but physically close to you. Not emotionally close to you, but they're physically close to you. And you're just seeing things that no person on earth should ever see. Unfortunately, that has been a very common thing up to, hopefully, we're getting out of wars now. Hopefully it's going to calm down a little bit. Some of my friends and people I've met in life have been abused by parents. And so that changed them. You know, I was just watching a beautiful documentary on Netflix about the F1 Williams family. If you guys dig F1, it's an amazing documentary. If you like just anything that has deep touching roots, it's an amazing documentary. But there's a gentleman in this documentary, I believe his name is Jack Williams. He was involved in an accident, and he had his neck broken. This is his legacy. It's not spoiling anything for you. And they asked him, they said, well, how did you deal with all the pain that you experienced? Because he's going through all this incredible pain. And he said, the body has an amazing defense mechanism against pain. It helps you forget pain. It helps you ignore pain. Now, he's talking about physical pain. But the brain is exactly the same mechanism that helps you manage your physical pain as it does your emotional pain. It compartmentalizes pain. It tries to keep the past almost out of your purview because it doesn't want you to experience this. It knows you thought this was a horrible experience. It knows that you had, in some cases, an experience occur that had no orientation. Imagine driving down the street to your local job, local supermarket, and a bomb goes off underneath your car. And your car's not going to fly 30 feet in the air. For whatever reason, you survive, but your passengers don't. People around your car don't. Maybe you're not directly over it. Maybe you're off to the side. There's all kinds of traffic accidents that have similar events. Tanker trucks that roll over and explode. Well, who wakes up in the morning going, well, I got to be careful. Maybe this will happen to me. But even if you know that in your brain that kind of stuff can occur, if it does occur, you're not ready for it. You can't be ready until maybe it's the second or third time. And our soldiers who have been involved in these situations, there's nothing like the very first time that something outrageous and amazing and god-awful occurs. But as I had it described to me, it is a moment in time that is lost. And so if you knew the moment, because a lot of people get in accidents and your short-term memory doesn't get recorded into your long-term memory, so you lose about 10 minutes of your life. If you go into intensive care and you're in extreme physical and mental shock, you may not remember months. I had a business partner of mine get a motorcycle accident, went in the hospital, got a morphine drip. He was in really bad shape. Thank God he's fully recovered today. But when I asked him if he remembered me visiting him in the hospital off and on for 3 or 4 weeks, he was like, nope, I don't remember you coming in ever. I was like, wow, that morphine was something else, We know that there have been horrendous experiments on human beings through the MK Ultra program and previous incarnations in Germany where they tortured people. And then they treated them really nice. And the torture event gets erased. Sorta. It gets compartmentalized in the back. Whatever conversations they're having during the torture phase, they don't remember in the nice phase. And the nice phase is a lot longer than the bad phase. But if they torture them again, everything that happened in the first torture moment becomes instantly recallable. So if they have a conversation about something, they remember the previous conversation. But not when they're being treated nicely. It's how they make Manchurian candidates. There's more to it than that, but of course that's the base science on it. So, the first time I ever heard about PTSD, it was called shell shock when I was a kid, and they were talking about trench warfare in World War I. And then it became bombing raids in World War II, where they actually, in order to stabilize bombs dropping out of planes, they created these little fins, and it just so happened to whistle, this horrible whistle. You all have heard those movies where it's all psst, boom, the Doppler effect on the whistle. And then, as I understand it, those of you who are big history buffs, please weigh in and let me know if this is correct. I was told that they realized it was an extreme intimidation mechanism to hear that. And so what was initially a serendipitous thing became something that was a deliberate. They made it louder, from what I understand. Makes sense. There's nothing worse than anticipating your death or your injury. But now this organization that was part of the building, they own the building that we were leasing a room from, they were using virtual reality to give soldiers back the moment that was missed. So imagine a soldier with all of his buddies drive over an IED on accident. Obviously there's some casualties, there's injuries, but they don't remember any of it. And we're going to get into that second phase. But what they're able to do with virtual reality, because people have the notes that were taken when they picked up the truck pieces and carried everybody away and got everyone healed up if possible, they recreate the event. They ask the soldier anything they remember about the event. Where did you put your gun that day? Specifically, like where you put your coffee cup, and everything matters, because then it attaches better to that memory that's in there swimming around like crazy. The recovery rate was gigantic. The guy said that most soldiers, 50% of soldiers, would drop out of a PTSD treatment because it was all cerebral, lots of conversations, psychotherapy, and it just wasn't the sort of thing that a soldier was likely to do anyway. I mean, a soldier is an amazing person. A soldier is an alpha being. They conquer, they don't get conquered. And so this was sort of, I guess it wasn't working, the previous technique, but the virtual reality thing kind of abstracted the doctor away. Even though they can hear the doctor talking, they're in something kind of cool. It's like a video game. In fact, the amount of money being spent on the VR is a lot, so hopefully it looks good. I never went through the process, of course. But now think about it. Let's look at a non-PTSD mind for just 1 second. You wake up and you can rely on your reality. You have gathered enough protocol and rules in your life according to your choices. You got some from your parents, your grandparents, your buddies, TV, whatever, books. And you built a pretty good life for yourself. And then all of a sudden, something happens, maybe once, maybe dozens of times, maybe hundreds of times, depending on where you are in the world and what time you are in the world, that starts to shake up whether or not you can rely on life being reliable. It's a big deal, because we just take it for granted before we have it shocked into our system that maybe we can't rely on things. Now, one of the things I want to address right away is that one of the documented side effects of PTSD is having a lack of confidence in the self. I want to go after that super duper quick, because I don't want anyone who has PTSD to lose that feeling. I want to give you some perspectives that you can think about. Hopefully they'll give you strength to throw that one away. Get that one off your list forever. Here's the thing. You were able to wake up and feel a reliable model of life. Now, because you have this thing flying around your mind, and we're going to try to find ways to grab it. Before you grab it, just understand you're still as strong as you ever were. You're still as amazing as you ever were. You're just going to have to find this thing, and you're going to have to lock it down. But because it's an unknown, because this thing has been running around in people's mind, and people don't understand, as I understand it, the soldiers, and I'm going to focus on the soldiers because it's the easiest one for now, they don't know this has happened to them. They don't know why they feel uneasy. We're going to get into that next, but until we find it and we lock it down, there should be no self-confidence, no self-critique. I know it's frustrating to go from having perceivably control of your life, and then now these weird waves of emotion come up, and you're like, man, I used to be able to control this, now I can't control this. There must be something wrong with me personally. It's not you. It's almost completely unbiased to you. A thing has happened to you. It's a mental thing, and you can fix it. You can fix it, and you will fix it. So until you do, cut yourself some slack, cut yourself a blank check. As you feel these things come on, I want to rebrand it in your head a little bit, if this works. If I had a psychedelic drug, and you'd never taken one in your whole life, and we're in a beautiful place, and I said, dude, I'm going to give you this. It's only going to last for like 30 minutes. You'll be completely done. Won't harm your body at all. But you're going to go through all these weird emotions, like a kaleidoscope of emotions. Every emotion that you can have is going to go through. And yes, you will go through some positives and negatives. But you will never lose sight of the fact that you are you. You won't lose control over yourself. Your outer body is not going to react to this. You're going to feel it inside your heart. It's going to make you feel strange. There's no terrible panic in the drug, so don't worry about that. But even if there was a little slice, if you know this is happening because I've given you a little psychotropic drug or whatever, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this experiment. Maybe it's only 5 minutes long, so it's not so terrifying. 30 minutes is a bit of a long trip if you're going negative. And I say to you, look, I'm right here. You're totally cool, right? Yeah. All right, we talk about everything around the room. We got water, we got food, we got shelter. There's no cliff behind you. You're good. Nice quarantine place. And you take this, you put it on your tongue, and you start, about 5 minutes later, you start going through this kaleidoscope of emotions, like the everlasting gobstopper of emotion. And I said, just tell me what you're feeling. And you're like, oh my God, I feel totally euphoric. And then the next thing, you're like, oh man, I feel a little scared. And I'm like, it's just a feeling. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? Wow, I feel a little scared. Man, I'm feeling a little angry right now. Oh my God. Now I'm feeling insecure. And you're going through all these emotions, but you know it's because I gave you this little tiny weird drug. Now, don't take that drug if it exists. And I'm always there giving you some context. And then 5 minutes later after it starts, every emotion is about 30 seconds. 5 minutes later, you're over. You did 10 emotions. I'm like, what do you think, man? You're like, whoa, I wouldn't do it again. But that was an interesting experiment. It put it into context that I intentionally had that happen to me because I ingested this drug. Now, take that and apply it to an uncontrollable reaction to PTSD. And we're going to get into how this triggers. And again, if you've already done your research, you've already talked to a doctor, this is all incidental to you, and you'll laugh your head off because you know how primitive what I'm saying is. But if you haven't ever been and you think you might be feeling this, and again, you don't have to be a soldier, you could just have something have happened to you. It might help you out. All right. So what is the linchpin to PTSD? What makes it occur at all ever? Well, thankfully, there is an answer, and it is very basic, and it's called threat. When your body feels threat, this is where you'll hear the word the limbic system in your mind. It's where they believe threat is processed. Whatever, doesn't matter. You don't have to know the tube in your brain that's causing this to occur. Just know that when you're threatened or you feel threatened, and let's think about the different forms of threat. As a soldier, maybe you're marching into a situation, you are drawing threat upon yourself because you're being the aggressor. That's one form of threat. Some folks are coming after you. Very poignant, very specific threat because they're trying to hurt you this way. If you are a citizen in London while bombs are being dropped by the Germans, a V1 or V2 rocket is coming in, making strange sounds. We're bombing them. You're a German way back in the day. Just put yourself in their shoes. You feel helpless while you're being threatened. Now, when you're attacking, you probably feel this adrenaline, this confidence in yourself. When someone's coming at you very specifically, it's not a random thing falling out of the sky. They're specifically coming at you. You're engaging your fight or flight. You are engaging all the strategy of your left brain to survive. Some folks will remain completely calm, and some folks will be very, it's their very first time, and so they're very scared. So we have confidence, we have logic, we have fear, and we have hopelessness. And there's other emotions that swim around as a reaction to threat, right? So threat's the linchpin. So when people have PTSD experiences, again, they'll be maybe overseas and they'll be in one of these deserts fighting, in the hills fighting, wherever they're fighting, jungles, and they have some unbelievably profound experience occur. Could be you were driving home one day and you saw something insane. You could be involved with something here in the States, or wherever you live in the world. It's very intense. You couldn't process it. Too much was going on. People yelled in ways you've never heard someone yell. If someone gets injured, you saw a body in a state that you've never seen it before. It's horrific. And you empathetically could feel their pain, or you could feel at least the family's pain when they get notified if someone passed away as a result of an experience. So then there's remorse. Okay. When you have a relapse, if you come home, and again, the worst thing was 20 years ago, there just wasn't a tremendous amount of focus on this, as I understand it. They've been doing shell shock treatments since World War One. Just go watch. I don't know how accurate this is, but if you watch Boardwalk Empire, there's a gentleman in there who's a sniper who had part of his face blown off. He wore this mask, and he was in there, and they were trying to give him the shell shock test. How mentally sane are you? All right, very dry, very horrible. I mean, it's not inviting, right? It should be as warm as it can possibly be. Today, it's so much better, as I understand it. But the thing is if you come back and you think, I did experience something really intense, but so far I feel okay. All right. But then you start having those emotions I just mentioned. And they seem to kind of flurry around inside of you in a way that you don't seem to understand. Why am I feeling this way? I don't have anything bad happening. I'm enjoying a picnic with my family. I'm watching TV. I'm at a bar, wherever the heck you are. And this stuff just occurs to you. And let's say you're a soldier. So you're used to being in control. You've been taught how to get things under control. And you've seen stuff, intense stuff. And now you're just in maybe middle America, and you're like, well, there's no threats here. What's causing this to occur? For some reason, there's an emotional checklist inside of our minds. And the emotional checklist is different for everybody because it has a different starting emotion. You have your different reactions to it. But there's a thing at the bottom. There's a little checkbox at the bottom that we need to discuss. And the checkbox at the bottom says, resolved. I had all these emotions, and I have dealt with them, and I have resolved them. When PTSD occurs, because the event has lost in time, you don't have the checklist anymore. You may not even know the emotions that occur during this traumatic moment, and so you can't check off the bottom checkbox. And that's what drives you crazy. Oh, I don't mean to use crazy, but just irritates the hell out of you. Let me give you a quick physical example of this. Not that you need it, but let me just give you it. I stopped at a stop sign once. I was 18 years old. I just bought a brand new car. Lady hits me, 20 miles an hour right in front of a police station. And I was looking at my buddy over to the right, and I got this whiplash. Bent my neck sideways. And I definitely had a pinched nerve feeling, but I didn't know anything about my body at that time. I didn't realize, plus I was a tough guy, right? I was this tough kid. And so a year later, I'm souping up all my bodybuilding and stuff, and I had this big bar, the one that's kind of S-shaped, it's kind of cool. And so I'm doing this, and all of a sudden on my reps, as I started getting to the exhaustion point, I was noticing my right arm was slower than my left. Well, I'm right-handed. Unbelievably, that night, a chiropractor called me and said, hey, we're doing free evaluations. Would you like to come in? I said, yeah, I think so. So I go in, and he gives me this grip thing. And I grip it, and there's a little needle on the top, and it shows you how strong your arms are, your hands and stuff, and your arms. My left was 10 pounds stronger than my right. But he goes, you're right-handed, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you must have a pinched nerve because your right hand is 20 pounds weaker than it's supposed to be. I was like, it's because of the car accident. What car accident? Oh my God, yeah, you should have come in right after. I said, yeah, I was an idiot. I didn't know about this whole thing. This lady could have paid for my next 6 years worth of chiropractic care. So I started getting adjusted, and this went on for like 6 years. Little break in the middle as I moved. But I was able, I had this injury that really manifested itself a year after the actual injury because it was so slow. That stuff happens, and it happens mentally as well. I once went to a psychologist who's a friend of mine. He was an elder of the church, and he just did these little sessions, and he asked me if he could do a session with me because he's a professor. He doesn't get to practice. I said, yeah, that would be awesome, because here I am ingesting psychology books like crazy. And he sits me down, and he managed to pull out an unresolved issue I had with my parents. It was amazing. I was furious. Like when I left, I was really pissed off. I got in my car, actually drove faster because I was pissed off. Before the night was over, I was just like, okay, I now have discovered that emotion. It was my little PTSD. I grabbed it. I looked at it. I said, well, whatever. My parents are kids anyway, so whatever. They screwed up. I screw up all the time. And then it was resolved for the rest of my life. It was crazy. From what I have been told by the professionals in this industry is as soon as a soldier is able to capture and recreate the moment of PTSD, it can vanish very quickly. Now, if it doesn't vanish quickly, there's no big deal. You just got to keep thinking about it and keep managing it. Sometimes just thinking about it and describing it to yourself rationally, even though you don't necessarily buy it, over time, it'll give you a context to reconstruct a moment in your life. I just told you about a treatment that uses virtual reality for this. Now, if you're suffering from PTSD, you might want to look up PTSD VR treatment, and if you haven't been able to find it, resolve it, you just find it and have the hopefully the VA pay for whatever you got to do to get to a facility that can do that. I think one of the things that might occur, because here's what I think as a non-PTSD soldier especially, is that I put myself empathetically in the soldier's place. I almost joined the military. I grew up on military bases for at least a third of my life, if not 40% of my life. I wanted to be a Marine. Oh my God, you have no idea. But I fell into the nerd trap and I went off and became really creative. But I always mourn the fact I didn't join. Being vulnerable is a hell of an emotion. Hell of an emotion. I think that we can travel decades and decades and decades of our lives without ever feeling vulnerable. I think dudes can, like this guy, this Williams guy from the F1 team, I'm not sure he ever felt vulnerable like he did when he broke his neck. And then it's like, it's not just like a little injury, maybe you lose a finger, you lose an arm. And, there's plenty of ways to continue living with missing limbs. You can do it. You can be blinded and still function. You can lose your hearing and still function. But when you break your neck and you become a quadriplegic, you're going to have to grow up really fast, right? And I have no clue, or maybe I only have a clue what that would be like. But let's just say you look in the mirror and you're still that handsome bastard you always were before you left. Maybe you're even better looking, or you're a lady. I don't mean to exclude females that might be going through this. But you're looking in that mirror and you're going, man, I'm having multiple instances throughout the day where I'm having all these emotions go nuts. And here's something I want you to remember. One, you are going to find this event and you're going to resolve it. Period. Give yourself time. Two, feeling vulnerable? Well, you're just normal. But don't forget to tell yourself that it's okay to feel vulnerable. This was an incredible event. If something happens so intensely in your life that you have a PTSD, whether it be a domestic situation or a war theater situation, doesn't matter. It was a big event for you. Big event. Maybe for someone else it wasn't such a big deal, but for you, it's intense. And maybe when you were out with your buddies and you're looking at a bunch of stuff that is horrific, you said things that weren't true. And maybe they were true for you at the moment, where you're like, yeah, it's not a big deal. I don't care about that. I'm tough. I've seen this before, or whatever. And you get home and you're like, man, I'd never seen that shit before. What was I saying that for? That stuff was traumatic. Maybe you say, I'm not even the same person anymore. Well, what'll happen to you after PTSD is over, after you conquer it, or get control over it, you will be a much stronger person in the end. So focus on that too. Not only are you going to get through this thing, and you're going to get through it because at least you're going to have to be honest with yourself. If you have a spouse, be honest with them for sure. Even if you have kids, it's all right. It's all right to tell your kids, hey, you know, daddy experienced some pretty insane things. Mommy saw some things that she never wanted to see. And so I'm just thinking it through. I'm just trying to find out a new perspective on life, that these things can occur. Now, I've read several articles on this, and mostly the articles where people describe the events that frustrate them because one gentleman, I can't remember, this is like a couple of years ago, I read this article where a gentleman said he was just driving down the street in his little town, and he said that it was super frustrating to him that people were happy around him, and that they had not a care in the world, and that he joined the military and he was forced to deal with these horrible things. And so in one respect, he was like, these people are so incapable of dealing with what I just dealt with. Like he sees them as non-soldiers, and he's probably right. Hopefully we don't have to have soldiers at some point in the future, right? But for now, unfortunately, because there's bankers and monarchs, we will have wars. It's all based on fake stuff, right? In some cases, if someone gets imbalanced in the world, it's sometimes that imbalance actually happens because there's money spent to imbalance it, keep people undereducated, whatever, to push a false belief about somebody else. And sometimes we just got to stay where we are in the world because we don't integrate well. So maybe someone's 1,000 years, 2,000, 5,000 years behind the rest of us. Okay. Can you live in your neighborhood? Because they can live in theirs. All right, cool. But if you're forced to deal with this guy was talking about having his perspective so changed that he had this extra layer on top of his PTSD, excuse me. One has to keep those two layers separate. For his view on society, this person has been enlightened. Unfortunately, they've been enlightened in a way that is regrettable from one perspective. But again, wars have to occur. But here's the other way to look at it. If you're a soldier that comes back and you saw things, again, I wasn't technically raised by an individual who did this, but my dad's best buddy, as I've said several times, he definitely saw it, and I spent at least 3 years within his circle, and it was a very profound 3 years. Let me take it back a few years, because I have this experiment. I have this funny little game I play with people. I said this a long time ago, and I'll say it again, and you might get a kick out of this yourself. Everyone loves to people watch, right? So I used to travel a bunch, sit in airports forever, looking around at people. But even if I'm in a place where it's just I'm downtown LA, they're waiting for some concert to start, or I'm at a concert, I look around at people, and what I do is I play the video game thing to say, if we were back in the fabled King Arthur days, I look at somebody, usually it's dudes, and I'll say, is that guy a blacksmith? Or is that guy, oh no, that guy is a blacksmith. Yeah, oh, that thinner guy, he's probably an archer. That medium guy, he's a swordsman. That older, skinnier guy that's got the glasses on, he's probably an advisor to the king. Sometimes it'll be the king. Sometimes it'll be the queen. Sometimes it'll be a maiden. Sometimes it'll be some other intense person. But I would do this game where I would kind of overlay on top of people what I thought they might be in a movie. If you come back and you have this perspective, and this can happen without any PTSD, without any negative effects, you move to the big city, you experience a bunch of things, and then you go back to your little town, wherever that is, you're going to have this extra layer that this other guy had, no matter what. Now, his layer is, the gentleman in this article was having a very intense emotional experience with his layer. But now think about it. Every town needs a chieftain. Every town needs multiple centuries, soldiers, guards. You're just one of them. You left a boy, and you came back a man. You left a girl, and you came back a woman. Not just any man or any woman, but a strong, reinforced person that now the entire town can rely on you. And as you have time to, one, capture your PTSD moment, identify it, and, technically speaking, you could have multiple moments. My thought and my hope is that if you had like moments, dealing with one of those moments will give you equipment in your mind and a regiment to be able to capture the others. But instead of reflecting poorly on the situation and seeing this big delta between you and them, this big difference between you and them, see yourself as an elevated partner of society that is going to be relied on when things occur. Imagine you go over, you're 19 years old, and you come out roughly when you're 23, 24 years old. Hell, maybe you tour a few more times and you come out in your late 20s. So you got all these wild experiences. Usually this PTSD thing, as I've had it described to me, occurs for someone who does a short, 4 years, but you went right into the thick of it. And so you're young. You don't have a lot of context for these type of experiences. And then you come back and you integrate with your family. You've got kids that maybe that were born while you were gone, and you're trying to integrate. And it's such a difference between war and home. Well, think about it. If we can figure out a way to just postpone any bad reactions to this, we just give ourselves a big deep breath. We say, look, this PTSD is coming around. I'm going to find that event and I'm going to deal with it. But meanwhile, while I go through these swimming emotions that I can't control, I'm going to let folks know I'm having that experience. I'm a little vulnerable when those experiences are occurring. I will find it. I will conquer it. Whether it's a VR camera or me just meditating in the backyard and thinking about the event, calling a few buddies that were there to help reconstruct the event. Dude, you were there. Where the hell was I? What happened? Like, what was the next thing happened? Go in as much detail as you can possibly go into. And if you got to call them 20 times and have them say it 20 more times, do it. Record the conversation. Whatever technique will work for you, you will find that event and you will conquer it. You will grab it and dispose of it. Boom. You'll put it somewhere inside yourself where it has context. It probably will never be a positive experience, even if you do grab it. It's a negative thing, but it taught you the value of life. But now let's take that other thought and apply it to this, and then let's move ahead 10 years. Now you're in your early 30s. Well, you are wherever you are. You're in maybe your small town. It's easier to describe it in a small town, in my opinion. You are taking your family from point A to point B. There's a 4th of July event happening or whatever. It's all a glorious event. But now all of a sudden, there's an accident. Not quite wartime suffering, but there's an accident. And so what you do, because you have found peace with your PTSD moment or moments, because you have seen yourself as an elevated partner of humanity, because you have gone through the eye of the needle emotionally and physically, maybe, and I know some folks that have done this exact thing. They've been in the war, and when things happen in the real world, everyone else is screaming, but because you made peace with the moment that this happened to you, you now can march straight into that accident and heal people. Get people to safety. Stop someone bleeding. I mean, you realize a little cut in the forearm can kill you if it hits an artery. But if you just put a little thumb on that cut and you tell the person, hey, you keep your thumb on this, you're fine. But if you don't keep your thumb on that, we're going to get you to the hospital quick. We're going to fix that artery. Don't worry about it. You'll be just fine. You could save a life. And so you might be more equipped in this world to help humanity get through these awkward moments. And think about it. The odds that you're going to see something horrific here in the States, it is rare. It is rare. I mean, yeah, we drive down the highway and see accidents, and you see cars plowed into cars. Thank God cars are way more safe than they ever used to be, right? I mean, we have side impact, bags and all kinds of cool stuff. So it takes a lot to see stuff here in the States. So you don't have to sit in any bubble of fear that you're going to imperatively, obligatorily run into these events. Nah, you may never. But the other thing, too, is to remember you may not be ready for a while. And so it might be one of these situations where, let's say, you see it. Maybe you're driving, maybe your wife's driving, maybe your husband's driving, and you're feeling the vulnerable thing because you haven't quite resolved the PTSD moment. Maybe you simply say, I can't deal with this. You mind if we drive around this? I mean, if you can help them, great. Get me to someplace else. I can't deal with this right now. I'm going to go through a really bad situation. Now, one of the other bummers, and hopefully this has already nixed the issue, is that before you understand PTSD, before you admit to yourself you might have experienced it, and therefore have an event that is lost, that needs to be recaptured, a lot of times people self-medicate. They drink alcohol, they take a drug, and therefore they sort of add more vulnerability. Because as soon as you're intoxicated, be it by any means at all in this world, you're no longer in control, are you? You don't want to do that because it won't work. It'll make you more vulnerable. And again, when you drink, there's two types of drunks. There's the happy drunk that's just having a great time with it, maybe until they throw up or something. And then there's your angry drunk. And your angry drunk doesn't have to have any PTSD whatsoever. But the body's being attacked, the blood is being thinned out, so the brain isn't working well, the liver's dying, the kidneys are straining, the whole body's going into a communication breakdown, which is what we call being drunk. And sometimes the brain simply says, I don't know what you're doing out there, but you're being attacked. We are dying inside here. You think you're having fun, but we're dying. Attack everything out there. Because eventually you're going to attack something that's causing this problem, and it's going to end. Now, obviously that doesn't really work, because you can keep drinking and attacking everybody. I have a former neighbor who had a brother. I'm saying that so it's abstracted far away from. This person does not exist in my neighborhood at all and never really did permanently. But he had come back from Iraq during Christmas time, and he was seeing the family, which was awesome. He was safe. He was all in one piece. Huge guy. I mean, huge. And I went in to the kitchen to get a drink, and he was in there. I didn't know who he was. He looked like the people who own the house, so I was like, oh, must be a relative. Sure enough, it was a brother. He was already kind of lit, which I should have noticed, but then he's telling me that he just came back from Iraq, that he was on leave for 3 weeks. And I said, well, that's great, man. I said, I'm glad to see you in one piece. Hopefully, go over, come back on one piece. I'm just saying some nice things. And he starts staring at me. And then some people came in to get drinks as well. I haven't got anything yet. And he points at me and he goes, that guy doesn't like the military. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't say anything. I'm looking at these other people like, I didn't say anything like that at all. And then his sister came in and she starts waving him off and just saying, come on outside. This guy's got issues. Maybe he was suffering from PTSD. I don't know. Later that night, he got into a huge fight on our street. It's the biggest fight that's ever happened in the 16 years I've been at this house. Now, there's another thing that adds to PTSD as well, which I also read in another article. And that is that when a soldier's in the theater of war, sometimes it's not perceived as bad at all. It's being perceived as extremely productive. There's amazing camaraderie. People have your back all the time. It's an amazing family when they're over there. And then they come back and they're separated from all their buddies because everyone's from a different place in the United States. It's like a good baseball team. And now they've lost that. And so there's a overall sadness to get over that you're missing your buddies. If you ever see the series MASH, from, I don't remember, early 70s to the early 80s, they have to say goodbye to each other. It's for those of you who are totally young and you don't know what the hell that was, it's about the Korean War and a MASH unit, which is a mobile medical unit. And it's a comedy. It's a lot of fun. But the last episode was, and there's definitely some sad episodes in the series, but the very last episode, everyone survives who's at the end, right? There's one reported casualty in the third season. But at the very end, everyone's going home. And the saddest part was we were losing the show, which had just become a staple in the diet of a 3 to 4 channel television, right? You didn't have 100 channels or 1,000 channels. And so we all just turned the TV on. We were playing MASH, and this was happening. But people went home to their respective states. There was actually a follow-up series where they actually, 4 of them, I think, came back together to live in a house together or in a neighborhood together. And it was like sort of that warm feeling of like, oh, God, at least they're all together again, you know? The people had to say goodbye. And that's just going to be the results of any gathering in the world, no matter what you're doing. Whether it be a military gathering, you used to work for a company. Man, I used to have a department of 55 of the coolest people on planet Earth at Electronic Arts. When they had to lay off, 3,900 people in 3 giant chunks. I guess it was 4 giant chunks. It was really sad. It was super sad. My department always made money for the company. We made millions of dollars. I think it was minimum of $3 million a year for the .com. All the other departments were losing cash, and that's why everybody had to go. But my department's like, come on, man, we're hanging on to the product representation online. We've tripled the store revenue, more than tripled. I'm making this episode. I've had this PTSD thing on my list for probably almost 2 years. I didn't know quite how to attack it because, again, I'm talking about it as an outsider. And I have friends that have gone through domestic things where they have had their confidence destroyed. And, you know, just to get off the soldier thing for a second, there's a lot of vulnerable people, at least back in the day, in the video game business. And they were introverts because of their vulnerability, and they became really good at something creative. Maybe they're programmers, maybe they're artists, whatever, storytellers. They're good gamers. And sometimes, no matter what I would do, or my friends, if we had a mutual friend that was always sort of weak. He didn't want to. He knew he was weak. He didn't want to be weak. He kind of knew why he was weak, but he couldn't overcome it. And it may be the fact that the PTSD treatment that our soldiers are getting nowadays might have helped him way back in the day. But again, we hadn't developed the science, and I just think we hadn't talked about it enough to be able to have the conversation with each other. I would imagine, because there's definitely restrictions about females in the thick of war, that this is obviously going to be a 95% in terms of war results. No disrespect. I mean, the females have to take care of soldiers and all kinds of different situations, and they definitely get out there and get caught by the enemy. There's been plenty of those events, so I'm not trying to minimize anything. But now, what is the funny little thing about men asking for directions? We don't ask for directions, do we? And why don't we ask for directions? Because we're supposed to be the man. We're supposed to have answers. We're not supposed to be weak in front of our females, let alone our family. That's just directions, man. That's just asking for directions. All right, so What if something is, you travel back to the States, you've got this lost event or events, no one's talked to you about this, so you have absolutely no tools in your tool chest. Oh yeah, the military wants to interview you, but you're resisting that anyway because I'm strong. I don't want to be categorically written down on a piece of paper as having a problem, because that's going to mean more to you. Maybe for some people it might mean more to them. I got a piece of paper that tells me I'm broke. I don't want that piece of paper in my life. Just seeing that, you might think, I think incorrectly, that will become a permanent stain on your insides. Maybe. I think if no one communicates to you about this condition, it could easily become a permanent stain on your insides. I don't think it has to be that way anymore. Maybe I'm talking on my ass, but I think if you have methods and you have knowledge about why certain things are occurring to you, you've got tools. Just like Spicoli said in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I can fix this. My dad has tools. Now, the other thing I'm just going to put out there, and I'm not a doctor. I've heard these, everyone's heard these. If you paid attention to the PTSD articles out there, there's people who take their own lives because they can't live in this cycle of perceived lack of control and vulnerability. I don't know if those individuals who ended up taking their life ever had this discussion. It pains me to think that they didn't have this discussion. It pains me to think that they would ever take their life for any reason when really when it comes down to brass tacks, they were willing to sacrifice their life for their country. Well, you're a hero. You have stood up, put your money where your mouth is. You went over there, you risked things. Now, whether you agree with the war that you're fighting, whether you come back and go, I shouldn't have been there because this, that, and the other thing, don't worry about that. That's a problem we're all trying to fix in the Great Awakening. What's important is you were willing to sacrifice everything, including your life. Now, the other one that comes out of that is the age-old problem of maybe you survived, but some people in your company, in your squadron, whatever, didn't. And there's obviously an infinite level of circumstances that can be applied to anyone coming back with that emotion. Perhaps, in the chaos of war, something didn't go right. You didn't think you had a left and a right decision. It was a binary decision, and you picked a path where some folks got injured, maybe passed away. And so you might hold that guilt. But you know what? You might have gone the other route, and something totally unexpected that you don't realize today would have happened that would have taken more lives or an equal amount of lives. But even if the other path would have brought everyone home safely, we're not computers. We're not fortune tellers. We're human beings. First time I watched a softball game my daughter played, and I saw the umpire make some serious mistakes with the calls. I'm with the other parents, and I know jack all about it. And so I would go, shouldn't they redo that call? I mean, that was obviously horrible. Everyone saw it. And I forgot who said it to me. He goes, no. He goes, that's what makes this game amazing, is that we have human error. The whole thing's a human game. Well, no one's losing their life in a softball game, hopefully. So we blow that off. But when it comes to a theater of war, it's much more intense, isn't it? Some of you have had the thought, you would do anything not to see another person suffer, including trading places with them. Some of you are like that. Because your perception is, maybe quite accurately, I don't want to have a whole life of dealing with this person having passed. And I'm in the variable, I'm in the equation of potentially being responsible. Maybe I'm not, maybe I am, I don't even know. There's that whole scene in Full Metal Jacket, the second part, where they, they wiggle up to that building and people drop. Very important people to us in the fictional movie that it is. It's not that a person won't fight to live, but if they do pass, my guess is they're not wishing everyone on the other side, all their buddies, to have a bad life. I don't think anyone passes saying, be tormented by my moment right now for the rest of your life. I would bet that out of a heart of a soldier, a heart of a hero, we have to do them a solid. And we have to say, they wouldn't want me to feel this way about them disappearing out of this world. So in order to respect that wish from a hero, if you think your buddy was amazing, let's go ahead and finish the definition, shall we? They wouldn't want you to feel that way about their passing. If anything, they would want you to live a wonderful life, to get home safely back to that family. And if you have to, I mentioned it once in my episode, I believe, about the afterlife and reincarnation and all those things. I think it's probably my afterlife episode. I lost some buddies in high school to accidents. And I made a decision, because I was still in a small town at the time. I had this dream of coming to California and doing a bunch of wild stuff. And I did it. But as I was doing it, as I was driving 1,800 miles back to California, having just taken a trip to find an employer, I'm like 17 years old. This old 1976 Dodge Charger Special Edition eggshell white, with a nice dent in the back fender that the lady who owned it before me did. I said, look, let's go. All of us. Everybody who left before high school was even over, or right after high school was over. Get in a car, let's go. This is all of us living together, getting all those dreams that you didn't get to get because you left early. That really was therapeutic to me, to get over my friend passing. One of them very specifically was, a hero of mine. And so I worked extra hard and I focused extra hard, and I always felt like he was at my side, participating, celebrating. Now, maybe that actually occurs, maybe it doesn't. Even if he did come along for the ride, I bet at some point he'd go, dude, that was really fun. Now I see that you got to really live your life now. I'm going to go up to where I need to go. Meet you when you come here. Boom. I get my life to myself. I don't feel like he's around anymore. Maybe he visits, I don't know. I want to make sure that, and I hope this is already occurring because I'm not deeply involved in this whatsoever. I want to neutralize through method and discussion these little pockets of reality where great people feel like they've lost control when they are probably the most equipped to be in control. Now again, I'm assuming anyone watching this video who may or may not be, or let's just say maybe suffering from a PTSD moment, whether it be, again, war theater stuff, domestic stuff, you may be familiar with every concept I'm talking about. It is my hope that through the way I describe it, it helps. I hope that it adds perspective such that you can write yourself some blank checks every once in a while. Give yourself a break. Don't feel like everything has to be fixed right away. If you're having a bout of swimming emotions that are driving you nuts, and I understand irrationality too. I understand you can get, Jesus, it happens to all of us without any PTSD. You can get angry and just lose your freaking mind and say things you should never say, break something you shouldn't break, potentially hurt somebody. Even if that occurs and you have further embarrassed yourself because of the condition, don't worry. Sit down, be honest, apologize, Hopefully you won't end up in any penal system, but even if you did, use that time to get in touch with yourself. It's just that moment that's lost in time. Capture that moment. Put it in place. See your strengths, because you have strengths. See your heroic instincts to protect humanity. There's nothing better. The Great Awakening has pulled in millions of people around the world who have that heroic gene, but they don't have any need to go to war, so they're doing whatever they can to pass information around to wake everyone up to the craziness. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful. I invite every single one of you who are having the experience to share what you're experiencing, how off target I am, maybe how on target I am, because I want to continue this therapy in my own life. I want to continue it for other people. Maybe I experience something in the near future, some point in my life that's traumatic, and I want to have all the equipment I can have too, from folks that have triaged it and fixed it, gained control. If you've had an experience that was successful in treating it, you've got a clinic that really worked for you, a process that worked for you, you realize if you share it down below, it's forever. Everyone can read that stuff as long as your account's still active and your comment's still there. If you're on the receiving side of it, then obviously patience is going to be further defined beyond anything that you've had defined in the past. You're going to have to be very careful and communicate every day, every split second. What are you feeling? What are you feeling? Especially if there's a imbalance going on at that particular moment. As I understand it, from the articles I've read, okay, it does come and go. And it just has a whole swimming and maturation of emotions, and you might find a tool to deal with depression, but you don't have a tool to deal with anger. But maybe you have one for anger and you don't have one for depression. If depression has any rationality in your mind whatsoever, just focus on the fact that you'll get through this. You will conquer it. You will. Life will be better than normal when you're done, because you will be stronger than all of us that haven't experienced it. And you might save a life at a future point in time, whether you save another PTSD person or you just save someone going through some experience, because you're so calm. You've seen stuff that no one ever sees, and when you're looking at whatever you're looking at, you're like, imagine you went to war and you either had PTSD or you didn't, and you came home and you saw some serious injuries and maybe even some casualties, and your son or your daughter wrecks their bike really bad, and yeah, they bunged themselves up, maybe even broke their arm. You can come to their aid in a way that will be amazing for that child, making them feel like they're going to be just fine. You know, this backyard back here, I used to play catch with my daughter, and before she was really old enough to be on a team, in fact, I think she must have been about 8 or 9 years old, the ball went back, and I've got some rose bushes back there, and she leaned down to pick up the ball, and she drove a thorn right into her forehead. And she pulled back, and she felt the sting of the thorn, and I'm looking at her, and I see this trickle of blood go straight down her forehead. Now, we have a choice about how we're going to deal with that. And she was not a crier. She just was like, oh, what's going on? And I just looked at her, and I went, oops. And I put my palm right on her forehead like this. Boom. Putting the pressure right on that little cut. Just barely scraped her, but there's a tremendous amount of blood in your forehead for whatever damn reason. I put it on her forehead, and I said, whoops. I said, you scraped yourself. I said, let's go to the kitchen. Because I didn't panic, because I didn't feed into that, typical reaction of a parent. Oh my God. My kid didn't cry, because once the parent panics, the kid's going to double panic, right? And we just bopped into the kitchen. And luckily, the pressure I put on her forehead between right back there at that wall and into the kitchen over here, pretty much stopped the bleeding. But now my kid's going to see blood. And she's going to see her own blood. I don't know if she'd ever had seen that before. And I said, Whoopie, you scraped yourself. You got a little bit of blood coming out, right? And so I just got a paper towel. I wetted it, and I just wiped off her forehead, and I washed my hands off so she wouldn't have to see a ton of it. And I just dabbed it, and it's kind of like almost fixed. But I said, you want a Band-Aid? And kids love Band-Aids, man. Yeah, sure, man. All right. Dink. On her forehead. No problem the rest of the day. Next day, took the Band-Aid off. She's totally healed. Well, that's what a soldier can do, or someone who's gone through something traumatic. When they recover, or even before you're maybe even finished, you can add that security to someone's life and be a little hero. In fact, to kids, you're gigantic heroes, right? But you can help your spouse that way. And maybe it's not that easy. Maybe it goes on for a little while longer. But again, you've had your saber sharpened to slay dragons in this world. See it that way. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio, there's video, there's a locked Facebook group, there's a Twitter page. If you want to tip the show and support the show financially, for $1 you can join Patreon. You'll get these links a little bit earlier than everyone else. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.